At my mom's funeral, my aunt leaned in close enough that I could smell her rose perfume and said, very softly, "You know you're not real family, right?" She said it the way people say, "Watch your step," like she was doing me a kindness. I was holding the program with my mother's name in bold black letters, the dates under it like bookends, and I just stared at Aunt Lorraine's lipstick, perfect and cruel. I didn't answer. I pressed my thumb into the crease of the paper until it left a crescent. The church basement buzzed with those funeral murmurs, metal chairs scraping tile, coffee being poured into styrofoam cups, somebody's uncle telling the same story for the fourth time. There was a sheet cake with my mom's photo screened in icing. People were slicing right through her smile. "Lorraine," my cousin Becca hissed, the only person in our family who ever dared hiss at Lorraine. "Stop. I'm just saying." Aunt Lorraine's earrings, little gold leaves, shivered when she shrugged. "It's better the girl hears it now than later." The girl. I'm 31, but sure. The girl who was adopted at 5, who kept mom's appointment calendar on the fridge in the last brutal year, who learned the names of her medications and what to do when the chemo made her hands shake. The girl who slept in a chair at the hospital so my mom never woke up alone. Not real family, though. People kept patting my elbow. "Your mother was a light," Mrs. Ferris said, her hands still dusted with flour from the deviled eggs. Mom had made the deviled eggs every church potluck for 20 years. Mrs. Ferris tried to replicate them, and the paprika sat too heavy on top. "She was so proud of you." As if to prove the point, a dozen memories marched through my mind. Mom dancing in the kitchen with a wooden spoon, Mom pretending not to hear me sneak in late, Mom pressing her cheek to mine at my college graduation and whispering, "I did it, kiddo." She always said I did it, but she meant we. The world was a place Mom and I did together. Aunt Lorraine never liked that. She and Mom grew up in the same cramped house with the same strict father and the same hand-me-down piano lessons, but they came out different. Mom was soft-spoken and steady, the kind of person who came with soup and stayed to wash the pot. Aunt Lorraine marched. She wore clicky heels and statements. She liked people to know when she'd entered a room, and she liked things to be in their proper place. In her mind, proper meant blood. "Let's go," Becca said to me, appearing with 2 cups of the terrible coffee. She guided me toward the hallway where the coat racks were. "Ignore her," she whispered. "She's grieving in her Lorraine way." I nodded, but the sentence had already found a shelf inside me. It sat there all afternoon, heavy and obvious, while the pastor told stories and the choir hummed and the line of casseroles cooled. It rode with me when I followed the hearse, and it perched on my shoulder when we stood at the cemetery and the wind pinched at my ears. That night, the house groaned the way old houses do, every pipe and board suddenly impossible to ignore now that silence had moved in. It was the small blue Craftsman Mom loved, peeling paint, hydrangeas taller than me in June, a porch swing that squeaked when we laughed too hard. On the mantel, the ceramic birds she'd collected from thrift stores watched me like witnesses. I made tea and didn't drink it. I took down the appointment calendar and put it back up. I slept in Mom's bed because the thought of mine felt like trespassing. 3 days later, Aunt Lorraine showed up with garbage bags and a clipboard. "We'll get this sorted," she said briskly, like we were tackling a messy foyer instead of a life. "Before the will, it's only decent to make sure the valuables are secured." "The will?" I asked. I knew there was one. Mom had said, "It's all taken care of," in that voice of hers that made me believe her even when my stomach knotted. Lorraine waved the clipboard. "Lawyer said a month to get the paperwork in order. Meanwhile, I'll keep the jewelry in my safe. Your things can go in boxes." The pause around "your" was surgical. Becca trailed behind her, eyes apologetic. "We can just make piles," she offered weakly. "Keep, donate, toss." I stood in the doorway of the kitchen and watched Aunt Lorraine open drawers like they had offended her. She lifted the tarnished locket my mom wore on holidays and held it in the air. "Family heirloom," she announced. "It was from a yard sale," I said. "It was meaningful to Eleanor," she snapped, using Mom's full name like a gavel. "Which means it belongs in the family." I made myself breathe. "I'm in the family." She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You were her responsibility, dear. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The week after the funeral stretched and sagged. People stopped by with leftovers and stories, and then they stopped stopping by. I learned how long it takes for flowers to wilt, and which sympathy cards fold shut more stubbornly than others. I started writing Mom little notes because she hadn't liked a messy kitchen, and grief is a kind of clutter. I kept finding her in the house, her laugh hiding in the cupboard, her hand in the groove of the banister, her scold in the squeaky porch swing, only for all of it to be memory when I turned. At the end of the month, a letter arrived on thick paper that smelled faintly like an old book. Keating and Sons, Attorneys at Law. The envelope had that grown-up weight, the kind that drops your heart straight into your shoes. Becca was on the couch. She paused the movie without me asking. I slid it carefully. You are requested to attend the reading of the last will and testament of Eleanor May Hart on the 14th at 10 a.m. Please bring identification. Want me to come? Becca asked. Please, I said, and the word came out smaller than I felt. We showed up early because that's what you do when your life is about to be measured. The office smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. The receptionist wore a cardigan the color of oatmeal and said kind things with her eyes. When Aunt Lorraine arrived, she clicked across the lobby in navy heels, hair too perfect for weather and grief. Behind her came Uncle Dennis, Lorraine's second husband, who smelled like aftershave and indifference, and two cousins I barely knew, summoned by promise or obligation. The conference room was all polished wood and framed diplomas. Mr. Keating had a voice like a dial tone, smooth and precise. He shook hands, he offered water, he arranged a neat stack of files and a pen that looked like it had its own mortgage. My hands went cold. Aunt Lorraine sat at the head of the table without asking. She placed her purse on the chair beside her, like saving a seat for entitlement. Let's not drag this out, she said, as if the will belonged to her impatience. Mr. Keating cleared his throat. We will proceed in order. I felt Becca's knee bump mine under the table. The clock on the wall clicked each second into the room like a metronome. Mr. Keating unfolded 2 pages and began to read my mother's steady voice in his measured one. And that's when I realized Aunt Lorraine had built a whole castle in her head, furnished it with my mother's furniture, hung the locket on its walls. She expected to get everything, but instead, every eye in the room turned toward me as the papers were signed. I didn't recognize my own name at first. In Mr. Keating's careful voice, it sounded like something carved into wood. To my daughter, Nora Hart, he read, every syllable laid gently on the table like a fragile dish. My hands went still in my lap. Across from me, Aunt Lorraine's smile tightened, then cracked. The will started with small, ordinary kindness. To my sister, Lorraine, Mr. Keating read, the cut-glass candy dish our mother loved, because you always kept it full at holidays. A flicker of satisfaction crossed her face. To my niece, Rebecca, the upright piano and the metronome, because you were the only one who ever played with feeling. Becca squeezed my knee under the table. To Mrs. Ferris at church, my deviled egg platter. To the community garden, $200 for seeds. I swallowed. I could see Mom's handwriting on a grocery list, the way she would underline where it mattered. Then Mr. Keating turned the page. The clock ticked on the wall like shoes walking away. To my daughter, Nora, I leave the house at 214 Maple, all its contents not otherwise specified, and the remainder of my accounts, including the life insurance. I also leave to you my recipe box and the ceramic birds on the mantel. You know where they go. The word daughter hung in the room like a bell still ringing. Aunt Lorraine let out a startled, breathy laugh, as if someone had told a joke with poor timing. Excuse me, she said. I believe there is a mistake. Mr. Keating adjusted his glasses. I'm reading directly from the executed original. She is not. Lorraine's hand cut the air in a clean slash. She isn't family. The room shrank to the small circle of the table. Uncle Dennis looked at his shoes. One cousin pretended to cough. Becca's fingers pressed harder into my knee until it almost hurt. Mr. Keating was unruffled. Mrs. Hart adopted Nora on June 12, 1998. He slid a photocopy from the file and tapped it like a hymn book. This will also contains a no contest clause. Anyone who challenges the will and fails forfeits their bequest. Lorraine's earrings trembled. My sister was generous, but she was also sentimental. She could be persuaded. The word sat there, ugly and obvious. My throat burned. Mr. Keating folded his hands. Eleanor prepared this will 18 months ago. She reviewed it again in hospice and confirmed its contents by video. I was present for both. Her intentions are unambiguous. Becca made a small noise, half laugh, half sob. Auntie, she said softly, You know this is what she wanted. Lorraine's lipstick sharpened. Of course you'd say that. You always took her side. I took the side of the person who raised me, Becca said, and her voice was gentle as a bandage. Same as Nora. Mr. Keating continued, practical as a level. There were directions about the hydrangeas. Please don't pull them out. They've made it through 3 winters. Sponsors for the choir robes, if there's anything left after the roof. And then, 2 sealed letters. One addressed to Nora, one to Lorraine. My skin prickled. He slid an envelope toward me, heavy as a small stone. The other he placed by Lorraine's purse. She didn't touch it. Signing came last. The pen he offered was absurdly elegant, weighty enough to anchor my shaking hand. I wrote my name where he pointed, the ink shining a moment before it sank into paper. When I looked up, every eye in the room was on me. Not with envy, exactly, but with the kind of attention you give a tightrope walker. Even the receptionist had paused in the doorway holding a stack of envelopes, as if the air itself had leaned in. Lorraine cleared her throat. So the house, she said, as though testing a suspicious fruit at the market. You mean to tell me my sister gave the house to? She couldn't quite get the word out. Her. The deed will be recorded in Nora's name this week, Mr. Keating said. Keys should be returned to the executor today. He looked at Lorraine's purse, where I knew Mom's locket lay warm among receipts. Any items previously removed from the estate, but not bequeathed, should be returned as well. Color rose in Lorraine's cheeks. She pulled her purse closer like a small animal. Eleanor asked me to protect certain valuables. Mr. Keating didn't argue. He simply slid over a typed inventory with clean bullet points, half of which I recognized and half of which made the back of my eyes sting. Holiday cookie cutters shaped like stars, the Afghan with the crooked border, the locket that was never from our grandmother, just a yard sale find that became an heirloom because Mom decided it would. If any of these are in your possession, he said, the estate requests their return within 10 days. It should have ended there. A stack of signatures, a couple of stunned goodbyes. Instead, Lorraine stood so fast her chair squealed. This is outrageous, she said, voice pitched to shatter glass. I gave my life to this family. I arranged the funeral. I kept things together when Eleanor got sick. Her eyes found mine and sharpened. And you, Lorraine, Uncle Dennis murmured, but she brushed him off. You moved in on a story, Nora, she said. You took a lonely woman and gave her something to hold, so she forgot what real family is. I didn't mean to speak. The words just arrived. She didn't forget, I said. She chose. Silence rolled across the table like fog. Mr. Keating exhaled through his nose, a sound like a book shutting. He stood, smoothing the will with the flat of his palm. My office can answer any procedural questions, he said, polite as a door closing. In the lobby, Becca hugged me, so suddenly my letter crinkled between us. She can't take this from you, she whispered into my hair. She can only make noise. I nodded. Noise I could handle. It was loneliness that scared me. By the time we reached the parking lot, the sky had turned that cold, polished blue you only see in photographs. I sat in my car and stared at the envelope until the world blurred around it. The paper was thick, the kind Mom would have saved for holidays. On the flap, in her careful script, for my girl. My hands trembled enough that the edges shook when I opened it. The first line took my breath like a sudden cold pool. If he's reading this, it means I couldn't. Her voice filled the car, not in sound, but in rhythm. I heard her in the jokes she made when the coffee went weak, in the way she said my name. She wrote about the day we met at the Foster office. You had jam on your sleeve and you asked me if I knew how to braid. About how real is not a word you measure with blood, but with time. There were instructions that made me laugh through the tears. Check the sump pump in March. Don't cheap out on the roof. Heat the oven before you bake the lasagna, even if you're impatient. Keep the birds together, she wrote. They look lonely alone. At the end, a single sentence, underlined twice. Guard your joy. I pressed the paper to my face and breathed in the faint smell of her drawer sachets. When I looked up, Lorraine stood 2 cars away, arms crossed, watching me through her sunglasses. She didn't approach. She just raised her chin, a small motion like a verdict, and got into her sedan. At home, I set the letter on the mantel between the ceramic birds and took a long, shaky breath. The house felt different now, heavier and lighter at the same time, as if the walls had been bracing for an answer and finally got one. I turned the deadbolt and walked room to room, touching the familiar. The groove in the banister, the dent in the kitchen table where I dropped a casserole dish years ago. I could almost hear Mom. Make some tea. Sit down. I had just put the kettle on when a car door slammed outside. Then another. Voices, pitched high, not laughing. Through the front window I saw them. Aunt Lorraine, Uncle Dennis, and the cousins I barely knew, marching up the walk with the purpose of people who believe the truth is a thing you can pry loose if you tug hard enough. Lorraine didn't knock. She stood on the porch and called through the screen in a voice sweet enough to give you splinters. Nora, open up. We need to talk about what's going to happen to our family home. I didn't open the door right away. I stood in the hallway, holding Mom's letter like it was a shield. Aunt Lorraine was on the porch, arms crossed, her support team, Uncle Dennis and the two cousins, lingering behind her with the kind of restless energy that meant trouble. We need to talk about the family home, she repeated, slow and deliberate, as if speaking to someone who didn't quite understand. The home is already mine, I said through the screen. That's not up for discussion. We're family, she shot back. I almost laughed, though nothing about this was funny. That's interesting, considering what you told me at the funeral. Her face tightened, but she kept going. Eleanor never intended for you to take it all. She was sick. She wasn't thinking clearly. We need to make this right before the lawyer. Before she could finish, Becca's car pulled into the driveway. My cousin stepped out, eyes immediately scanning the scene. Is there a problem here? She asked, her voice sharp enough to cut the August air. Lorraine gave her a tight smile. We're just having a family conversation. Becca moved to stand beside me at the door. Then maybe it can wait until the will reading tomorrow. Otherwise, I'll be happy to call the police right now. Lorraine's earrings trembled as she straightened her purse strap. She gave me one last look, something between a warning and a promise, then turned on her heel. The cousins shuffled after her. That night, I barely slept. Mom's letter was on my nightstand, and I kept rereading that one line, guard your joy. The next morning, we were back in the lawyer's conference room. The smell of lemon polish and old paper felt heavier than last time. Lorraine sat at the head of the table like a general waiting for her troops. I stayed quiet, my hands folded in my lap, while Mr. Keating began to read. The bequest started small, the candy dish to Lorraine, the piano to Becca, a few small gifts to friends and neighbors. My aunt's lips curved slightly, as though the house and accounts she expected were just a few paragraphs away. Then came the words that froze the air in the room. To my daughter, Nora Hart, I leave the house at 214 Maple, all its contents not otherwise specified, and the remainder of my estate. The silence afterward was so sharp it almost rang in my ears. Lorraine's head whipped toward me, her mouth half open. Mr. Keating went on, but I could feel every eye in the room pressing against my skin. When the reading ended, the lawyer slid papers across the table for signatures. I signed where indicated, the pen heavy in my hand. Lorraine finally found her voice. This is wrong, she said flatly. You can't just hand everything to her. It's exactly what Eleanor directed, Mr. Keating replied. Her wishes were clear. Lorraine looked at me then, really looked, and I realized this was the first time she'd seen me not as a child, not as the adopted girl, but as someone she could not control. She stood abruptly, muttering something about getting a second opinion, but no one followed her out. As I left the office, Becca squeezed my shoulder. She can't change it, she whispered. It's yours. All of it. I nodded, the weight of both grief and relief settling in my chest. Mom had known exactly what she was doing, and in that moment, I finally understood the last line of her letter. Guard your joy didn't mean keep it locked away. It meant protect it fiercely, even if you have to stand alone to do it.